The Detroit Lions are one of the favorites to win the NFC next year, and in my opinion, they should be one of the top dogs in the NFC. So today, let's talk about the Detroit Lions and why I personally believe that they have what it takes to be the NFC champions. So in this video, we're going to break it down into 3 different segments per usual. We're going to start off by talking about the things I like about this Lions team, things that make this team a NFC championship-like team, and then we'll talk about the opposite, some things that may potentially hold this team back from actually reaching that spot. And then at the very end, I'll give you guys my unofficial synopsis on the Detroit Lions. Let's begin. So like every video, I want to go ahead and start off by briefly just discussing the personnel on the Detroit Lions roster, because for this Lions team, there's a lot to like. Obviously, on the offensive end, you have a lot of really solid weapons for Jared Goff to throw the ball to, like David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs in the running back room, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, and Khalif Raymond as your wide receiver 1, 2, and 3. And then, of course, the rookie sensation Sam Laporta, who's looking to take another step forward as a tight end for this team. Obviously, the offensive line is still one of the better units in the NFL, if not the best unit in the NFL. I do have some concerns about this offensive line, but it's less to do with the actual play on the field and more to do with some things that are out of their control. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But when you talk about this offense, there really is not a glaring hole in this team. Like, yes, would I ideally like to see this team have a better wide receiver 2 and 3? Maybe, but I also really do believe in Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams as a 1-2 combination. And because this is a team that identifies with running the football, having Khalif Raymond as your wide receiver 3 is not going to kill you at the end of the day. Defensively, it also kind of follows suit with the offense in terms of how much talent this defense has. Your interior defensive line with Aleem McNeil and DJ Reader is really stout and is a much improved unit from what it was last year. And then your outside pass rushers are guys like Aiden Hutchinson, Marcus Davenport, Derek Barnes, and James Houston, all guys who have a lot of upside. Aiden Hutchinson obviously being the best of those guys I named. I'm also excited to see what James Houston could do after coming back from what I believe to be injuries in this past season. Of course, your linebacking room is still ultra talented with guys like Alex Anzalone and Jack Campbell, who was a bit of a surprise first-round pick last year, but actually performed quite well last year. And then defensive back-wise, this might arguably the most improved unit on this entire team. Last year, cornerbacks were probably one of the bigger reasons why this team didn't make it farther in the playoffs, even though they of course made it to the NFC Championship game. They got significantly better in that position. Going out there and getting Carlton Davis as well as Amik Robertson, and then of course Terran Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw Jr., who are 2 of my favorite players in this year's draft. Those are guys who are big time playmakers, who are physical tacklers, who are not afraid to help in run support while also being very good in coverage. They fit the identity of what this Detroit Lions team is. And then of course your safety combination of Brian Branch, who can also play a little bit in the slot / nickel, and then of course Kirby Joseph is still a pretty solid player as a whole. This is not a perfect defense by any means. I would like to see a more set in stone edge rusher alongside Aiden Hutchinson, somebody who I can almost like guarantee is going to get you 5 to 10 sacks, sort of like a Yannick Ngakoue type of guy, somebody who you could just trust to get you 5+ sacks a season. Right now, I don't really know if any of those guys are set in stone players quite yet. Like, I do think Marcus Davenport has some potential, but it hasn't really shown up on the field yet. Again, I'm willing to hear out Derek Barnes and James Houston to see what those guys can do. I think that's totally fine for this upcoming season. But if your defensive line could use some work, it would probably be on the edge rushing position, which I would like to see this team maybe try to look to address in next year's offseason / draft. But now let's go ahead and move off of the personnel on the roster and just talk about what I like really about this Lions team, and it's going to be the identity that this team has set both offensively and defensively. This is a team that wants to run it down your throat over and over again and pound it and pound it and pound it, both offensively and defensively. They want to be physical. They want to move the ball with efficiency. They want to rely on their stars and their running backs and their receivers and of course their defensive linemen. They want to make you suffer as a team, and that's what makes this team so much fun to watch, because they are a team that plays football how I think we all want football to be played. Sometimes we get so caught up in these beautiful play designs that we see from guys like Sean McVay, when in reality, I think most of us just want to see another team punch a motherfucker in the mouth. And that's essentially what you're getting from this Detroit Lions team, which in my opinion makes this team one of the more unique rosters nowadays in the NFL. In a pass-first driven league, which by the way, this Lions team can definitely still pass the ball, this Lions team sort of stands out from the bunch as being a run it down your throat type of team that relies on the strengths of the offense, which is their offensive line. And when your head coach embraces that play style and embraces the culture and identity that this team has, it really makes for a roster that's super fun and super entertaining to watch. And then moving off of just the identity of things, another thing I like about this roster, and it's things that I think also help to add to the identity and the talent pool, is the overall blend of supporting younger players with older guys such as Jared Goff being an older veteran alongside some younger players like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jahmyr Gibbs. And that same sort of vibe goes along with the offensive line, which is mainly an older unit, but of course you have some young guys such as a Penei Sewell who really are amazing players in the NFL. Same thing applies to this defense, where you have some veteran players like DJ Reader, Carlton Davis, Kirby Joseph, Alex Anzalone, and you support those guys with young guys like Aiden Hutchinson, Marcus Davenport, Jack Campbell, your two stud rookie corners, Brian Branch. And so this makes for a roster that, similar to a lot of the teams in the NFC North, is a team that can compete now, which by the way this team will do, while also being able to compete for several years to come. And so while everyone is so focused on this team just going all in this year, this is a team that has probably the next 5 years plus to contend for championships. So if they don't get the job done this year, they could easily get it done in 2025, 26, 27, and beyond. But okay, we talked about a lot of some good things. Trust me, there's a lot more that we could go into, such as Ben Johnson being one of the best offensive corners in the NFL, such as Jared Goff playing at an MVP level. But let's go ahead and hold the brakes here and talk about some more negative things, so that way we can head into our segment number 2. Let's get into it. So to start off our more negative side of things, I will start off with some general personnel issues I do have with the roster. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, this team basically has no glaring holes. Like, yes, as I said earlier, I would like to see a new wide receiver 3 over Khalif Raymond, but I'm also just okay with him being the wide receiver 3 for this team. For me, it's actually less to do with the players in their positions, more due to the age of the offensive line, which is a bit of a concern for me. When you look at the offensive linemen, you have Taylor Decker, Graham Glasgow, Frank Ragnow, Kevin Zeitler, who are all technically older guys, some who are older than others. And then of course you have the super young and super reliable Penei Sewell, who's one of the youngest and best players in the NFL. This will not hurt the team this year, but I would not be afraid for this team to go out there and be aggressive in finding some future offensive linemen, such as a Christian Mahogany, who they drafted in this year's draft, who I think could be a fantastic player for this team come a couple years down the line. I would just say for this team moving forward, it would be a smart plan, a smart idea for them to go out there and draft some future replacements, because this is an offensive line that is getting a little bit older, so just kind of keep an eye out for that. But regardless, this is still a fantastic offensive line. It's just kind of a small concern I do have. But that's really it personnel wise. But there are a couple things that do concern me for this Lions team that aren't necessarily in their control, which for me it begins with the overall greatness of what the NFC North is becoming, because of course we already have this Detroit Lions team who is already championship contenders, but you're starting to see the other teams in this division really take strides into becoming some of the best teams in the NFL, especially in a weaker NFC that doesn't have a lot of great teams. Starting off with the Chicago Bears, who have been kind of a disgrace of a team the past couple years, they are legitimately becoming one of the more talented and well put together rosters in the NFL. Defensively, they have been rebuilding and retooling, and now it looks to be one of the better defenses in the NFC. But really the strides they've taken forward this offseason has been on the offensive side of things, going out there and getting a supreme talent like Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze, and adding guys like DJ Moore last year and of course Keenan Allen this year. They still have a couple years in my opinion before they become legitimate championship contenders, but I do think that's a team that low-key could potentially make the playoffs given how easy their schedule is. Then there's the Green Bay Packers, and of course I'm really high on the Green Bay Packers because they have a lot of things going for them just as much as this Detroit Lions team. They have an uber talented quarterback in Jordan Love to go along with a lot of really good players surrounding him both offensively and defensively, not to mention they had a really good draft and a really good offseason in terms of free agency, so that's a team that next year is also kind of in that championship bubble. And of course the Minnesota Vikings are in my opinion probably the weakest of the 4 teams on this list, but that's just because I don't know quite yet what we're getting out of Sam Darnold / JJ McCarthy. I feel like it's pretty safe to say that Caleb Williams will probably be better than both those guys, but it will be something that we'll have to kind of keep an eye on when it comes to regular season time. But as a whole, that is a Vikings team that is also just studded out from position to position with so many great players. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, these are teams that have a good mix of older players and younger players, so they can compete now, but they'll also be competing alongside the Lions for the next 5+ years, which in my opinion is a bit of an issue, but it's something that the Lions should be expecting from these other teams. It's not like they're going to run from the smoke, and of course it's not going to happen. Beyond just the NFC North, I think there are a couple other things that could be a bit concerning for this Lions team, mainly the contract situation with guys like Jared Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown, who recently got some pretty hefty contract extensions. I'm not saying those guys are not worth the money, but giving Jared Goff as much as they gave him was a lot of money, and I hate giving a quarterback who's like Jared Goff, who I do think is a good quarterback, but definitely not a top 5 quarterback, as much as they gave him. To me, it really limits a lot of what you can do with roster building, and of course, this is not a team that really has to do a whole lot more roster building, but keeping the guys on your current roster and paying them what they're worth is definitely going to be a bit of an issue. So I do worry if 2 to 3 years down the line, when the money situation starts to get really tough, they're going to have a harder time filling in certain positions with veteran and experienced players who are worth a pretty hefty amount of money. Not to mention you still have to pay your younger guys such as Aiden Hutchinson than some of the other guys on defense, like who you took in this year's draft. But of course, that's something that isn't going to be an effective for this team this upcoming season, but it is something just to kind of keep an eye on. On that similar note, and the last thing we'll talk about before I get to my synopsis is, of course, the possibility of Ben Johnson leaving. Ben Johnson was one of the hottest head coaching candidates this offseason, and despite the fact he didn't get a job this year, I would be very shocked if he does not get a job next year. And so, of course, there should be some grooming behind him to see if you can find their future replacement for him, because I do think it is kind of an inevitable thing for this Detroit Lions team to lose Ben Johnson. But all right, we talked about the good, we talked about the bad. Let's now talk about my unofficial synopsis. And yes, I said unofficial because I don't want to give you guys an exact pinpoint record prediction. We'll do that a little bit later in the offseason. But I think it goes without saying this Lions team is maybe the best team in the NFC, and I truly do believe that they are up there with the likes of the Niners and the Eagles. And in fact, when it comes down to identity and roster building, I would argue to say this Lions team is even better than those teams. They may not have the big time names like the Christian McCaffreys, the AJ Browns, the Saquon Barkleys, but when it comes down to performing in the role that this team has, the Lions are one of the best at doing so. So to me, I would be very shocked if this team was to lose anywhere more than 5 games next year. I think they'll win easily over 12 games and definitely probably be in the NFC Championship game. And in my opinion, I would not be shocked if they do represent the NFC in next year's Super Bowl. I'm going to be rooting for this Lions team. They're not my favorite team in the NFL, but I like the identity that they've built and I like the team as a whole. But you guys tell me, what do you guys think? Do you guys think this team is championship worthy? And if you enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.